Hello everyone, Shubham this side, and in today's video I'm going to tell you how use callback hook works by taking a real world example. And in this example we'll see how React re-rendering affects debounce function. And instead of learning by theory how use callback hook works, we'll see an example and we'll try to understand how it works, right? So uh, to start with, I'll go cd into my desktop and I'll create one directory, call it as react use callback. You can name it whatever you want. I'll cd into that directory and I'll initialize a Vite project. So I'm using Vite for this because I wanted something quick to set up and we can get started with whatever the important part of this video is. So Vite is basically a front end tool which we use, which improves the developer experience, and it includes some features like hot module replacement and pre-bundling. So if you want to know more about it, you can visit vite.js.dev. So to create a Vite project, you can run npm create Vite and delete latest. Right. It will ask you some instructions. So I want to create a project with the same name as my current directory. So I'll enter a dot. I want a React template. I want and For now I'm sticking with a JavaScript because we want this tutorial to be really quick. So I think the project setup is done. So now we can open it into the VS Code. So now our project is done setting up. Now open your terminal, and as you can see there is no node modules folder, so Vite does not pre-install your dependencies, so that's why the project creation is really fast. So we have to manually install our packages. So we can run npm install in the terminal. If you don't know where terminal is, you can go to view and then terminal, right? So if I uh, about to tell you why Vite is preference for development experience, let me show you something. Let's first wait to install the dependencies. Now let's run our server by running npm run dev. So our project is running on port 5173. Let's open that. So what is the specialty of Vite? So now you can see we are updating a state. So now my state is 5 and let's update our code. So let's say updated code and let's save it. So our project is reloaded, and now you can see that count is still 5. So that means our state is persistent, unlike create react app. If you do some changes and save your project, create react app will reload your whole project and it will reset your state, but Vite is not doing that. So this is something because of hot module replacement, right? So that's just a glimpse of what Vite and why developer like Vite. Okay, so let's start with our main motto. So first of all, I'll create a function, a debounce function. So debouncing is basically limiting function execution calls or API calls based on intervals between keystrokes, right? So if I give you an example, we can go to Flipkart, right? So Flipkart has debounced this search input field. So now if I about to search anything, laptop, see it has made 4 API calls. However, I have typed 6 characters. So it is limiting the API calls like unnecessary API calls, right? So if I type really fast, it has sent only one API call for this many keystrokes. So this is because of debouncing. So it is restricting API calls for certain time time frame. So as soon as I stop typing, it sends the API call. So that is something we want to implement, right? So to do that, we'll create a function debounce. It will accept a function as a parameter and wait for, which is a timer, the duration that we want to wait for, right? So we will declare an initial variable timeout and we'll initialize it as a null, right? And we will declare, we'll create a function inside a function. So this is a closure debounced, and we'll accept some arguments args, and after accepting args, we will check if there is already a timeout instance running, right? If there is a timeout, excuse me, if there is a timeout instance running, that means user is still typing. So in that case, we want to nullify the previous, like we want to nullify the timer, right? So let's add a condition. If there is, if timeout is not null, that means there is already a time interval running. So before handling that, let's initialize our timeout by setting the set timeout, right? So what we are doing is, let me just complete this. We'll pass the args and we'll wait for this much of duration. So if you know what set timeout is basically takes a callback and it runs this callback after this much of duration, right? So, and we are assigning that timeout whatever the timeout returns. So it returns like this node.js timeout instance, and we'll store that in the timeout, right? So because this is a closure, this debounce function remembers the previous value of that timeout, right? So after one keystroke, the previous value of this timeout will be the set timeout's return value. So that is not null, right? So if user when this will become null, as soon as this wait for like this duration is passed, like if we pass 1000, then after 1 second this timeout will be null. So that means there is no another timeout instance there, so we can make an API call, right? But if user hit a keystroke before 1 second, the timeout is not null. So this condition is true. So what we want to handle here is we want to clear the previous timeout. We don't want to execute this previous function if user is continuously typing, right? So that's the main goal to debounce, right? So we will clear the timeout and we will set timeout as null, and we don't return here because we still want to create a new instance of that timeout by resetting the duration, right? So I hope this is clear. If it is not, don't worry, in future I might make videos on closures where I'll cover debouncing, throttling, memoization. So for this video, the use callback is like a center point. So if you don't understand this, that is okay. If you understand like basic concept of why we are creating this, that is uh, more than enough, right? So our debounce function is done, right? So now let's do some cleanup in our React code, right? So we don't want this, we don't want this. I'll keep the count button because I want this state to, create some scenario where it will affect the debounce function, right? I'll create one another state, use I'll call it as value, and I'll initialize it with an empty string, right? And I'll create an input box, and on change I want to run some callback. Okay, const on change, we will take an event, and we will set the value to e dot target dot value. So this is like a traditional React way to set an input state, and we will pass this on change to the on change handler, right? And we'll render this value uh, over here. We will say value. Okay, so let's see our application. So this is our application, and if you type anything, the value is getting rendered. Okay, now let's use this debounce and see how it works, right? So in this on change, my value is getting, like, my component is getting re-render on every keystroke. I don't want that. I want to print the value when user stops for 1 second, right? So let's see how we can do that. Okay, so what we can do is we can take this function, we will use a debounce, and we will paste this function, and we will pass the time interval we want to debounce for, right? So what it's saying is execute this function as soon as 1 second is passed after user stops typing, right? So let's see this in action. So if I type, I stop for 1 second, and that it like rendering the value, right? If I continuously get, like, if I am typing continuously, it's not getting updated. If I stop for 1 second, it will get updated. So what is happening is whenever I'm typing, this function is getting executed. So as soon as this function is getting executed, the timeout instance is getting created, right? So on my very first keystroke, the timeout is null, so it will create a timeout for 1 second. So timeout is still there for 1 second, and before that, if I hit any key, the timeout is not null. So it will clear a previous timeout. It will like reset the timeout to null, and it will create another timeout with 1000 millisecond. So it will like create it again and again on every keystroke, right? So as soon as I stop after 1 second, because there is no keystroke, the timeout value is not getting cleared. So after 1 second, it is executing this function which we are passing as an argument. See this one, right? So that basically it, like, that is the debouncing, right? So now how React re-rendering affect this? So for that, I'll do some hacky thing. So I'll use effect. Let me just code it out. Okay, I'll create an interval. I'll create an interval for 1000 millisecond, and I'll update the count on every 1 second. And let me just clear the interval. Let me just type this, I'll explain what it is. Yeah, so what set interval is, like similar to set timeout, set interval is a browser API, right? So this is not something which is a part of JavaScript. This is provided by browser. So what set interval does is, if you pass any timer, it will execute this function on every 1 second, right? And this is, we are doing some cleanups. So this is, we are what you say, this is similar to component, I believe a villain mount, right? So this is similar to component villain mount. Like, this is the cleanup callback, so you can ignore this. This is something which I've done to, do some hacky thing and update a state on every 1 second. So how it is affecting the use call, like debounce function? Previously, if we comment this out, we can see our debounce function is running really fine, right? After 1 second it is getting printed. If I continuously type, it is not rendering the value. If I stop typing, it is rendering the value. Let's enable our state updation. Now our state is getting updated every second. Now if I do this, if I stop, see, it is behaving like strangely. I'm continuously typing, but still on every state update, on every this state update, it is printing the value. So this is how React affects debouncing. Now what is happening here? Let's understand what is happening here. So if you understand React, then this is like simple, like you will catch why it is happening. So whenever state updates in React functional component, the component gets re-rendered. So what that means, it will re-render the whole component. That means including the debounce, right? So whenever user types anything, because this is closure, if you have a same instance of debounce, then only the closure will remember the previous value of timeout. But because it is getting re-render, every re-render, the debounce new instance is getting created. On every new instance creation, the timeout will be null only. So on every, so whatever you are typing, the multiple instances of debounce function is getting executed, right? So there are multiple instances, and because there are multiple instances, there is no what you say, clear timeout is happening for every individual instance, right? So this is a problem. So this debounce is not working. So how we can resolve this? So to resolve this, we don't want to recreate the debounce function on every re-render. So to resolve this, we have to use callback hook. So that is why use callback hook is made. So use callback hook basically memoizes your whole function, right? So it caches your whole function, and it avoids recreation of that function on every re-render, right? So how we can do this is we can use callback hook. Use callback, it will take a function. We can pass our debounce function in that, and it will take something called as dependency array. So what's this dependency array? So so this when you pass anything, this use callback will recreate this function if this depend anything from this dependency array, like what you say, changes, right? So let's save this and see how, if it resolves anything. So now our state is updating. We'll type it. See, now it seems like it's working. If I stop, it's getting rendering the value. If I type continuously, it is not rendering the value. If I stop, it is rendering the value, right? So this is how use callback hook solves the problem of debouncing. So this is a classic problem with debouncing. If you are using with React and you have some state updation going on like this somewhere, it will affect the debounce function, and you don't want that. So in that case, you use callback hook. So now you thoroughly understand what use callback hook does. It basically caches the function on every re-render, and if anything in dependency array changes, it will re-execute that function. See, now it is behaving strangely because our dependency array consists of the state that is changing continuously. So we don't want to pass this count there, right? So if we now test, it will work, right? So this is working. So this is how you tackle debouncing problem using use callback. So this is really this is really hard to catch if you don't understand how React works, right? So I encountered this issue in one of my production applications. I was like, on which I was working, and this is where you can use callback hooks. So that's all for this video. If you have anything, any queries or any doubts regarding this video, please do comment below, and I'll cover the debounce function in detail, like in depth, in future videos, like debounce, throttling, memoization, like whole closure thing in JavaScript. I'll cover in future videos. So, and let me know how you find this video. If this is my first video, and I would like to hear your feedback, right? So thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.